What the hell is justice? I've lost my legs, lost my entire life because of an accident that wasn't my fault. He screamed into the rain-soaked night, in a room illuminated only by the dim glow of an old bedside lamp. Thatcher, once the man who laughed at others' fears, now wept like a child, and Sienna, a waitress who had never studied medicine, yet carried a heart big enough to bear the unseen, did not walk away. You think this is a story about healing? Number. This is the story of saving a soul that had just died. And if you step outside now, you will miss the greatest miracle of your life. That evening, Charleston's sky wept a steady drizzle, and the sidewalk glistened like a mirror, fracturing the yellow light spilling from the waterfront grill. In that scene, Sienna Hart, 29 years old, deep-set eyes and hastily tied brown hair, was maneuvering among the tables as on any other night. She moved quietly, existing merely as part of this upscale backdrop where each dish cost the equivalent of her week's wages. A trembling hand, a tilting tray, and in that single misstep, everything collapsed. A glass of red wine shattered on the floor. Food splattered across a man's trousers, and his wheelchair came to rest in the center of a puddle. The entire restaurant froze. The man did not shout. He did not need to. With one glance, he choked the air. His face was as hard as stone-high-bridged nose, sharp features once familiar from the pages of financial tabloids now here, exuding cold contempt. With deliberate calculation, he withdrew a $100 bill, raised it just high enough for any server to see, then let it flutter down onto the tiled floor. Sienna bent to pick it up not for the money but by instinct, the same instinct that had picked up the shards of her own broken life countless times. He said, "Touch my leg. Can you perform a miracle?" No more words were needed. His look said it all. Disdain, a dare, and a crack in his pride. Sienna straightened, wiping her hands on her apron. She was neither angry nor afraid, but her voice rang clear enough to strike him where he least expected it. "I'm not a magician. But I can see clearly you're not in pain because of your leg. You're in pain because nobody dares to touch you anymore." A blink, a heartbeat of silence, and for the first time that night, Thatcher Rhodes, the famed former Wall Street CEO, fell silent. She turned away and continued her work. Yet in the air, something had broken, not the wine glass, but the icy armor around a soul thought beyond saving. Have you ever witnessed a chance touch shatter an entire life?
Welcome to 30 Millionaire Stories, where success meets solitude, and every story heals a hidden wound. Subscribe and discover the heart behind the fortune.
2 days after that icy encounter, Sienna thought she had banished that gaze from her mind. But it turns out some looks, once etched into memory, cling like ink stains on a white sleeve. She was polishing table number 3 when her phone buzzed in her pocket, a strange number, a man's formal voice from a private staffing agency. A VIP client requested that she serve as a temporary medical assistant. High pay, flexible hours, start immediately. She didn't pay much attention until they read the address. Villa number 11, Forest Edge, the wealthy suburban enclave nestled beneath rows of ancient camphor trees. And the patient's name? Thatcher Rhodes. An ineffable wave rose in her throat. Not fear, nor anger, but curiosity, tinged with foolishness. Perhaps because of that look the other night. Perhaps because her own heart hadn't forgiven herself for what could not be saved in the past. After all, one who has known pain always recognizes when another hides something. Forest Edge wasn't merely vast, it was empty. Not the silence you expect, but the kind of emptiness belonging to somewhere once lively, now abandoned. Moss-covered stone pathways, an automatic iron gate sliding open with no one to greet it. and the backyard that seemed to have forgotten it ever knew spring. She was led into the library, the room where light filtered through glass panes like dust motes in time's wake. There he Saturday, still in his wheelchair. But this time, he did not brace himself to command the situation. His face was duller, eyes more sunken. A man no longer angry, but not truly living either. He held out his hand not to shake hers, but to pass a sheaf of documents. On the cover was a contract. $1 million. If you make me able to walk again, or at least make me feel like I can. His voice was even neither cold nor warm, as if reading the clauses of a failed deal from years ago. Sienna did not touch the papers. She simply looked around the room, swept her eyes over the dust-draped piano, the silent bookshelves, the antique clock that ticked on unseen. "You don't need a therapist," she said slowly. "You need a reason." Thatcher shrugged. "I need nothing. I just want to see if you're better than my doctors." In that moment, she understood. This was no treatment contract. It was a challenge. One final test from a soul, lingering between pride and despair. She accepted. Not for the money, not out of pity, but because in that gaze, she saw something she recognized from her own reflection each morning when she still didn't know what she was living for. Sienna moved in part-time. No lab coat, no machines. She cleared the cabinets, opened windows, arranged the house's breath before touching a single muscle in his body. She didn't ask, "How are you feeling today?" She asked, "Did you sleep? Did the wind blow into the room last night?" "Have you ever played a piece of music that made you lose track of time?" Thatcher said nothing, but those silences began to shorten. She didn't touch his legs at first. She touched his life first. The cabinet of unread files, the broken music box whose spring had snapped, the yellowed cover photo from a financial magazine. She didn't try to make him stand, she made him look up. Once, while she was brewing tea, he spoke from behind her. "I used to ride a motorcycle across Nevada. The wind back then felt like it could wash every mistake from my life." For the first time, she saw him speak not of money or medicine or contracts, but of wind, of memory, of a human being, not an audit report. That afternoon, she brought him into the garden. Beneath the oak tree, where sunlight scattered in patches through the leaves, she asked softly, "Do you want to try? Just once?" He was silent for a long while, then shook his head. But she knew that refusal no longer carried the same edge. It was softer, like a long unused latch just recently turned. Perhaps what makes someone begin to walk isn't their legs. It's having someone willing to stand beside them, even when they're not ready. What do you think? Dear viewers, take a moment to relax or sip a glass of water, then stay tuned for the surprising developments ahead. Comment 1 if you're enjoying the story, so we know you're still here. There are wounds that take no visible form. They don't bleed, need no gauze, and no one ever asks about them. Yet these are the wounds that keep a person seated, unable to stand even though their limbs remain intact. Sienna did not arrive armed with medical kits or rehabilitation machines. What she brought into that mansion each day were only her warm hands and her wholehearted presence. A quiet form of presence that sufferers often dread because it forces them to confront the pain they have buried deep inside. Thatcher was unused to purposeless tenderness. Since he'd been confined to a wheelchair, people either pitied him or treated him like an empty chair. But she was different. She did not try to lift him. She did not insist on physical therapy. Instead, she unlocked the music room that had been closed for 3 years, dusted off the yellowed keys of the old piano, and restrung the acoustic guitar that had long lain forgotten in the corner. One autumn afternoon, When the sunlight lay thin across the floor like a golden thread, she threw open the music room door and left it open. No words, no demands. She simply left it as it was. A few days later, he rolled in. He pushed himself along the long hallway and stopped before the piano. The dark wood reflected the soft light like a stream of memories flowing by. He did not sit down immediately. He only placed one finger on middle C and held it there, not pressing, not trembling, as if afraid that a single note might summon the past and drown the fragile present. Then a note sounded, off key, a touch of roughness, a hint of tremble. Sienna stood just beyond the doorway, not stepping in. She remained silent, listening not to gauge his progress, but to witness a man gingerly finding his way through his own darkness. From that single note, he played another, a melody not yet formed, but enough to evoke things no one else could see, like his first smile as a teenager, playing for his mother in their cramped Brooklyn apartment. Or the afternoon he and his ex-wife sang a jazz tune out of sync but in perfect feeling. Memories surged back, unbidden. A few days later he asked, "Do you believe someone could love me so much they wouldn't walk away, even after I lost everything?" Sienna said nothing. She simply placed her hand gently on his shoulder, a touch that did not heal but was enough to thaw a frozen heart. Then, in a voice softer than the late-season breeze, she said, "No one has ever asked how much you hurt. I'm asking now." For the first time, he did not turn away. That evening after dinner, she handed him an old music player whose battery she had replaced. Inside were instrumental tracks she had chosen with care sounds without words, yet containing every nuance of emotion that language could never reach. He listened. He didn't ask why she did it. He didn't demand to know the origin of the tunes. He simply listened. At first, out of courtesy. Later, out of necessity, like someone long parched, suddenly finding a well. Then came the questions. Not rushed, not orchestrated, simple, sincere, emerging as naturally as breath when a heart begins to breathe again. About family, about his parents, about the brother who died in an accident before they could reconcile, about the ex-wife who left not because of the accident, but because he had pushed her away with his coldness, distance, and tyranny. He did not cry, but his eyes were no longer dry. He did not hide his story, yet he did not plead for sympathy. He spoke like someone weary of pretending to be strong for far too long. Sienna did not preach. She did not say, "Everything will be okay." She knew that some things don't need to be okay. They only need to be spoken, witnessed, and exhaled together. Sometimes, she would pause mid-session just to play a piece he once performed, then stand back and watch him silently shake his head, then break into a smile, the first smile untainted by bitterness. In that slow unfolding, each piano key began to carry not just sound, but memory, release, and a fragile spark of trust, wrapped in simple, unadorned notes. One day, as she adjusted his seating posture, her hand accidentally brushed his knee, the place that felt nothing. But this time, he did not flinch. He only murmured, "I can't feel anything there, but at least it's not as cold as before." And she knew the real healing had begun. You may not be able to mend someone's legs, but if you can help their heart believe it still has value, that it is still seen, then you have done what the world forgot. Isn't that so? There are resurrections that neither thunder nor blaze like fireworks. They happen quietly, inside a silent room, under the pale sunlight filtering through the window where someone who once gave up begins to stir their faith once more. Sienna understood that what comes too soon seldom runs deep. So she did not rush. Day after day, she repeated small, slow, gentle movements like the morning breeze. She massaged his knees with hands strong enough to apply pressure, yet soft enough to keep him from recoiling. She always began each session by playing an instrumental piece with a slow tempo, the sound she called the heartbeat learning to walk again. Thatcher never asked, "When will I be able to walk?" He made no demands or set deadlines, but he began to follow along silently without admitting it, without pushing her away as before. Each morning he let her adjust his cushion, let her gently mobilize his ankle joints, let her choose the background music, and let himself become part of that repeating sequence. Then, one morning, while she was working on his right foot previously completely numb, she felt a faint movement beneath her fingertips. She froze, keeping her palm perfectly still. She dared not speak. She did not want to shatter that fragile moment. A slow breath escaped him. Then, in a hushed voice thick with emotion, he said, "I feel something like a pinprick, like touching cold water." It wasn't a miracle, but it was enough to still a heart. Sienna did not smile or clap. She only looked up at him, her gaze gentle yet radiant like the winter sun. Not very warm, but enough to begin melting the ice. Thatcher turned his face away, but tears brimmed and dampened his lips. He made no attempt to hide them. He no longer needed to. The pain of pretending strength for so long now sought release. And in that chapel's silent room, he let himself weep not for what he had lost, but because, for the first time, something had come back. From that day on, small steps began. No one forced him to stand, but he decided to try. The dusty cane, unused for so long, stood propped against the wall. She simply placed it there, saying nothing, as though it had always waited there for him. One hand gripped the door frame, the other reached for the cane. His knees trembled, his thighs tensed, his shoulders braced as if to resist the whole world. 1 second, 2 seconds. Then he released. He couldn't stand yet, but he didn't fall either. He had failed, but he did not retreat, because this time, someone stood beside him, never leaving. In the days that followed, they tried again, still shaky, still unsteady, but each time his hand gripped the cane a little tighter. Each time his gaze lifted from the floor and sought something farther ahead. Sienna did not count his steps. She counted his glances, counted the moments he no longer asked, "Is this any use?" but began asking, "How much more than yesterday can I do?" On one Friday afternoon, as the sun was setting and the room glowed bright orange, Thatcher took 3 steps. 3 steps. Slow, faltering, hesitant, but real. She did not shout. She did not cheer. She simply walked calmly to his side, supported his elbow as he nearly gave way. Then, instead of speaking, she played the very first piece he had attempted weeks ago, its notes still imperfect, still unmatched, but brimming with courage. Thatcher sat back down, exhaled deeply, sweat dampening the nape of his neck, but it was not exhaustion. It was something else where the body was drained, yet the soul sparked anew, recharged by the look of someone who believed in him more than he believed in himself. And in that evening light, inside that silent room, the man who once thought his life was over found himself living once again. What do you think makes someone begin to stand up? Is it a miracle, or is it the presence of someone who never leaves? Dear viewers, stay tuned for the next astonishing chapter. Take a moment to like this video and subscribe. Then leave a comment below telling me where you're watching from and what time it is for you. It's always wonderful to see viewers joining us from all around the world. There are victories that come not from applause. They arrive in silence. When someone who once fell chooses to stand again, not to prove anything, but simply so they no longer feel small in their own life. Thatcher had taken a few steps. Stronger, surer, yet no one was counting those steps anymore. Because now the important thing was no longer his legs, but the eyes that no longer flinched from the mirror each morning, the music that no longer missed a beat each afternoon. The fact that a man once abandoned by the world now willingly stepped out of his own shadow. One morning, as Sienna was brewing tea, an email arrived. The sender's name lit up the iPad screen like a ticket back to an old stage. The Rhodes and Haven Board of Directors. His former company. The man who had once been CEO was now invited to return. Not to lead, not to reshape strategy, but merely to appear. To serve as the media face of the spirit of overcoming fate. To plaster his face on campaigns. To smile for the cameras, and to become a story told rather than the person living it. An honor? Perhaps. But to Thatcher, it felt like a gentle tap from a past that hadn't yet apologized, asking him to come back, just as he had finally found himself. He closed the iPad, sat silently in his chair, and gazed out at the garden where leaves were already drifting down. That afternoon he asked Sienna to sit opposite him, not to solicit advice, but simply to have someone by his side as he made a decision that could change the rest of his life. He declined the invitation. Instead, he drafted a letter to the press. Not a grandiose declaration, just a simple, honest paragraph explaining that he once believed success meant reaching the summit until he lost everything and realized the scariest thing was not losing power, but losing feeling. A few weeks later, social media buzzed with the headline, "The proud reborn from Wall Street CEO to founder of a fund helping people restart their lives." The fund's name was announced, Project Second Pulse. A simple name. Yet behind it lay a journey unseen, from the trembling hand gripping a cane for the first time to the tearful moment of feeling his toes again. He said little. He simply launched the fund, accepting cases of depression, trauma, and lost people who didn't need money, but someone to believe they still mattered. Sienna watched it all in silence. She took no photographs with him, signed no documents. Yet every morning she appeared in the garden behind the mansion, watered the plants, placed the teacup in its exact spot, and played music at just the right volume to float through the windows. She didn't need to be on the front lines because she knew that people don't need a spotlight once they've learned to light themselves. One evening, as they stood by the window, he leaning on his wooden cane, she with her sleeves still damp, he asked, "They call me the proud reborn. What do you think?" She did not answer immediately. When she looked at him, her eyes were the same as on the day they first met. Direct, unwavering, unafraid. Then she said, just loud enough for him alone to hear, "You didn't resurrect yourself to be called anything. You resurrected yourself to live your own life." He smiled, not because of the compliment, but because he understood for the first time that he no longer needed a role to feel valuable. After that day, the media continued to dub him an inspiration phenomenon. Interviews, podcasts, viral videos ensued, but each time the camera rolled, he said only one thing. If you're at zero, it's not the end. It's where you begin again with a second pulse. And somewhere in a local radio studio, among thousands of shares and comments, a viewer sat before the screen, a PTSD veteran, a single mother once in despair, a teenager who thought their life was over, beginning to believe they too could live again, not by a miracle, but by a touch made at exactly the right moment. Have you ever wondered, could the worst thing you've endured be the most precious gift you've ever received? Sometimes, what brings tears to one's eyes isn't pain itself, but the fact that at last one has overcome what once seemed impossible. And sometimes a miracle doesn't manifest in applause, but in the full silence of a look that speaks volumes. I see you. I am here. A year has passed since the very first day. Thatcher Rhodes felt a twinge in his heel like a pinprick. Since that first shake of his head when he said, "I'm not ready," and at the same moment began the journey of finding himself again. That morning, the city of Charleston was bathed in gentle sunlight, the sky vast and still as if holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. Memorial Hall, the venue that once hosted shareholder meetings and benefit concerts, now wore a different solemnity. Not glittering, not ostentatious. Just a simple, profound inauguration of a new facility. A free rehabilitation center for veterans and accident survivors, funded by the Second Pulse Foundation itself. All eyes were fixed on the stage. There was no music to lead in, no grand introduction. Only the sound of footsteps real, clear, and steady. Thatcher Rhodes walked up. Alone. No wheelchair, no cane, no assistant at his side. Only himself. Clad in a modest gray suit, and wearing a pair of leather shoes that had gathered dust in a closet for more than 2 years. The lights fell softly on a face once marked by hardship, now calm and radiant. He did not begin with a speech. He spoke not of achievements, nor of the accident, nor of sheer willpower. He simply looked toward the front row where Sienna Hart was seated. She did not stand out. No evening gown, no heavy makeup, only a white blouse and faded blue jeans, but for him, her gaze made every bit of pomp in the hall step back. I once lost sensation in my legs, but what truly paralyzed me was the feeling that no one was really touching me. He paused, swallowing the remaining lump in his throat. Someone once told me that I did not resurrect myself to be called anything. I resurrected myself to live my own part, and today, I live to pass that part on to those who think they have lost everything. The hall fell silent. Then came a ripple of applause, not simultaneous, not thunderous, but genuine, bursting forth as a balm for an unspoken shared wound. Sienna did not rise. She quietly slipped backstage, where the old piano moved from the Forest Edge mansion to this hall stood as a silent gift from Thatcher, like a discreet link between them. She sat and placed her fingers on the keys. Then rose the melody of that long-ago piece, the very first he had dared to play after his accident. The opening notes still trembled, but now flowed seamlessly and with deep feeling. The sound was not grand, but carried a rare warmth in such a formal space. Thatcher descended the stage, neither hurried nor hesitant. He walked toward her and the piano. No one knew whether he would sit, but he did, beside her. On the old bench they once shared, his hands struck the final notes, just as he had in that dust-layered music room. No one spoke, but in that moment the entire room seemed to step back. No kiss. No declaration of love. Only a duet never rehearsed together, yet in perfect harmony with every breath. When the music ended, there was no applause, only a profound silence where people seemed unwilling to interrupt what was unfolding before them. Two souls, one once shattered, one once silent, finding each other in the last place anyone would expect, amid the ruins. She turned to him and smiled. He said nothing, but his eyes answered. Happiness does not come from being able to stand, but from having someone sit beside you when you cannot. And you? Are you standing firm or still waiting for someone gentle enough to sit down beside you? Sometimes, what a person needs most isn't someone to help them stand up, but someone patient enough to sit beside them when they cannot. Thatcher's story isn't just about physical recovery, it's the journey back to being human. A person who is truly seen, trusted, and loved in the right way. If you find yourself in darkness, don't believe you're at your end. Perhaps you're merely standing on the threshold of a second heartbeat, an opportunity to live again more authentically, more beautifully, and more as yourself. Have you ever been Sienna the silent healer? Or Thatcher, the one who only needed someone to believe in him long enough? Leave a comment below. At 9 p.m. tonight, I'll be here to read and respond to each of your shares. If this story touched you, don't forget to like and share with someone else who needs a quiet miracle, and hit subscribe so you won't miss the next emotional journey. Thank you for staying until the very end. Sometimes, that alone is enough to heal a heart.